Mark, you've been all over the David story from the very beginning. Explain why an investigative grand jury is hearing evidence in the case and what that means.
So for those who aren't following us closely or my other podcasts closely, I have said for months now that it's obvious to any sentient being who practices law in Los Angeles County that the LAPD and the coroner are at odds. And usually it's a very symbiotic relationship, as you two know, between the coroner, the pathologist, and usually the chief coroner and law enforcement. This has had all the earmarks from day one of them at loggerheads. And that has been confirmed in the dueling press releases that we've seen in the last couple of weeks, not the least of which is then what happened was the
No warning, no announcement, no public record, yet behind locked doors, a secret grand jury has reportedly been convened in the D4vd case, and legal experts are calling it highly unusual. In the world of high-profile investigations, secrecy at this level is never accidental. It signals one thing. Authorities believe the truth is far more explosive than anyone realizes. Grand juries exist to operate in silence. But this one is different. The timing is sharp, the process is fast, and the silence from all sides is deafening. When prosecutors choose this route, it means they're no longer asking questions, they're building something. Evidence isn't being reviewed casually, it's being weighed for consequences that could permanently alter careers, reputations, and futures. What's most unsettling? What hasn't been said. No official denial, no confident press statement, no attempt to control the narrative. In cases like this, silence can be louder than any accusation. It suggests pressure, it suggests preparation, and it suggests that people involved know more than the public has been allowed to see. Sources indicate the grand jury be examining sealed communications, private financial movements, and testimony never intended for public exposure. This isn't damage control, this is a deep-level probe. And once a grand jury begins connecting evidence behind closed doors, there is no pause button. The process moves forward whether anyone is ready or not. Fans are watching closely. Critics are sharpening their theories. But investigators, they're calm, and that's the most alarming detail of all. Calm suggests confidence. Confidence suggests leverage. And leverage suggests outcomes that can't be undone. This is no longer rumor territory. This is legal machinery quietly turning in the dark. And when a grand jury works in total silence, history shows one thing. The reveal is never small. The question now isn't if this case will surface publicly, it's when. And when it does, the fallout could redefine everything connected to the name D4vd. The name D4vd had never moved quietly through the public sphere. It traveled fast through playlists, comment sections, late-night discussions, and industry meetings where influence mattered more than volume. But this time, the name surfaced in a very different context, not in headlines, not in announcements. Instead, it appeared where very few ever look: internal conversations, hushed exchanges, and sealed procedural steps that never reach daylight until it's too late to ignore them. In this version of events, nothing began with an accusation. There were no dramatic confrontations or sudden revelations. What changed first was tone. Conversations that once felt routine took on a sharper edge. Questions became more precise. Follow-ups came quicker. And somewhere inside the system, D4vd's name stopped being referenced casually and started being treated carefully. Those close to the situation sensed it before they understood it. Schedules shifted. Calls were returned by assistants instead of principals. Meetings that once ran freely became structured, timed, and documented. No one explained why. No one needed to. In environments like this, explanations often come last. The story doesn't suggest guilt or innocence, only gravity. Because gravity is what pulls attention inward when a narrative becomes too complex to manage publicly, and complexity, not scandal, is what forces institutions to slow down and look closer. A grand jury, in fiction as in reality, is not assembled for spectacle. It exists for insulation, to protect the process from noise, influence, and premature judgment. In this imagined account, when D4vd's name entered that space, it wasn't as a conclusion, but as a reference point, a node in a larger web investigators were attempting to understand. What made it unsettling was the lack of reaction. No counter-narrative emerged, no confident dismissal. In high-visibility careers, silence can mean many things, but in stories like this, it usually means one thing. Everyone is waiting to see what connects. Inside the closed room, the work was unglamorous. Dates were written on boards. Messages were read aloud without tone or interpretation. Names appeared, disappeared, and reappeared as timeline shifted. D4vd's role, whatever it was, wasn't isolated. It intersected, and intersections are where stories become cases. Outside, speculation ran wild, but it missed the point. This wasn't about one moment or one decision. It was about accumulation. Patterns that only appear when everything is laid flat and examined without context, emotion, or defense. In this narrative, investigators weren't asking what happened. They were asking how often and who else was present. Those questions change everything. For D4vd, the pressure didn't arrive as confrontation. It arrived as awareness. The subtle realization that every past decision carries weight when viewed through a different lens. That influence, once celebrated, can also magnify scrutiny, and that being central to a story means losing control over how that story is told. In this fictional account, no doors were kicked in, no charges were announced. Instead, there were notices, requests for clarity, invitations to explain timelines that once seemed insignificant. Each interaction was polite, professional, and unmistakably serious. The grand jury's strength in stories like this lies in patience. It listens more than it speaks. It allows silence to stretch until it reveals shape. And as sessions continued, the room began to feel less like a place of questions and more like a place of alignment where independent pieces started to resemble a single picture. D4vd's name appeared again and again, not as an endpoint, but as a thread. And threads, when pulled carefully, don't snap, they unravel. What unsettled observers most was the absence of leaks. In an age where everything breaks early, this process stayed sealed. That suggested discipline, confidence, a belief that whatever was forming didn't need help surviving exposure. By the end of this first chapter, nothing had been decided publicly, no outcome was implied, but the tone had shifted permanently. The story was no longer speculative, it was procedural. And once a narrative becomes procedural, it stops belonging to fans, critics, or commentators. It belongs to the process. For now, D4vd remains a name spoken carefully, written precisely, and examined quietly. The doors stay closed, the record stays sealed, and the only certainty in this fictional world is that, when silence lasts this long, it is never empty. As the fictional grand jury sessions continued, the investigation didn't expand outward, it narrowed. That shift mattered. When inquiries stop chasing new names and start revisiting old ones, it signals that the story is no longer forming, it's being tested. In this imagined world, D4vd's name remained present, not louder than before, but heavier, the kind of weight that settles when details begin to disagree with one another. Timelines were the first to fracture. Individually, each account made sense. Each message had context. Each decision could be justified. But when placed side by side, hour by hour, day by day, small inconsistencies emerged. Not contradictions. Gaps. Moments where memory softened or explanations became circular. Investigators didn't react to these gaps with accusation. They reacted with stillness. Stillness is how you let people keep talking. In the grand jury room, questions became simpler and therefore harder. Who was present? Who initiated contact? Who followed up? And when? Simple questions strip away rehearsed narratives. They force answers to stand on their own. Outside that room, the atmosphere shifted. Those connected to D4vd, collaborators, intermediaries, advisors, began to realize the process was no longer abstract. Being adjacent to a story feels different when documentation replaces memory. When your words appear on a screen, stripped of tone and intention, They become evidence of sequence, not meaning. This is where influence becomes complicated. In this fictional account, D4vd's career had been built on momentum, fast rises, creative freedom, a sense of inevitability. Momentum, however, doesn't translate inside institutional processes. There, influence doesn't protect, it magnifies. Every decision carries more consequence because more people are affected by it. The grand jury's focus turned to patterns. One instance proves nothing. To raise curiosity, a pattern invites scrutiny. The narrative wasn't about a single event, it was about repetition, access, and timing. Investigators asked whether decisions clustered around certain moments, whether opportunities aligned cleanly, whether silence followed specific interactions. These are not moral questions. They are structural ones. D4vd, in this story, was not portrayed as cornered but as watched in the way institutions observe when they are deciding whether something requires daylight. The absence of public movement became strategic. Every statement withheld reduced noise. Every delay allowed the internal picture to sharpen. Meanwhile, the industry reacted without speaking. Projects slowed. Partnerships hesitated. Nothing collapsed, but nothing accelerated either. This limbo wasn't punishment, it was caution. In high-stakes environments, caution spreads faster than rumor. Inside the grand jury, testimony layered itself. One witness added color, another added sequence, a third unknowingly corrected both. That's how alignment forms, not through confrontation, but through overlap. When separate accounts converge without coordination, they gain weight. At this stage of the story, D4vd's name no longer appeared alone. It appeared in relation to others. That distinction mattered. The question was no longer what did D4vd do. It became where does D4vd sit within the structure. Central figures are not always primary actors, but they are always. Unavoidable. Silence from D4vd's side remained complete. In fictional investigations, silence is not weakness, it is containment. Lawyers advise it when outcomes are undefined and exposure is premature. Every public word becomes an anchor that future facts must drag. Better to float than sink early. As sessions progressed, one theme became unavoidable: intent versus impact. Institutions don't judge intention easily. They measure effect. Who benefited? Who gained access? Who lost protection? These questions are uncomfortable because they don't require malice to matter. By the later sessions, the room had changed. Fewer questions, longer pauses, more document review. That transition marked a critical phase, the shift from gathering to weighing. When that happens, the process becomes inward-facing. Prosecutors stop asking what else can we learn, and start asking does this hold? For D4vd, the imagined pressure was psychological rather than dramatic. No public reckoning, no private collapse, just the knowledge that stories, once institutionalized, are no longer personal. They are evaluated without empathy, nostalgia, or fandom. Outside, speculation grew louder, but less accurate. Online narratives chased extremes, while the real process remained procedural and slow. That disconnect is common. Reality rarely moves at the speed of outrage. By the end of this second chapter, nothing had broken open, but something had shifted permanently. The investigation, in this fictional world, had crossed a threshold. It was no longer about discovery. It was about durability, whether the narrative could withstand exposure. And durability is what decides whether sealed rooms eventually open. The doors remain closed, for now, but inside, the story had stopped asking questions and started preparing answers. By the time the fictional grand jury reached its later sessions, the tone had changed in ways no one needed to announce. The room no longer felt like a place of inquiry. It felt like a place of preparation. Preparation is quiet, it is deliberate, and it carries the unmistakable weight of decisions nearing completion. In this imagined chapter, D4vd's name still surfaced, but differently than before. Not as a mystery to be solved, and not as a conclusion to be drawn. Instead, it appeared as a reference point, a fixed coordinate around which other details had begun to align. When that happens in institutional processes, the focus shifts from what happened to what happens next. The final phase was not dramatic. There were no raised voices, no confrontations, no sudden revelations. Instead, there was repetition. Documents were reviewed again. Testimony was revisited with fresh ears. Seemingly minor details, times, locations, sequences were examined not for novelty, but for consistency. Consistency is the currency of credibility. At this stage, the grand jury's work became less about people and more about structure. Stories were stripped of emotion. Intent was separated from outcome. Influence was measured not by perception, but by effect. This was where narratives either held or quietly collapsed under their own weight. D4vd, in this fictional account, existed in a strange space between presence and absence, not physically in the room, but unmistakably central to its logic. The process did not frame him as a symbol or a villain. It treated him as a factor, and factors, unlike characters, are evaluated without sentiment. Outside the sealed doors, the world continued to speculate wildly. Online theories grew sharper, louder, more absolute, but speculation had long since lost relevance to what was happening inside. The system does not move on belief, it moves on alignment, and alignment, once achieved, is difficult to undo. What made this phase unsettling for observers was the absence of leaks. No convenient fragments escaped. No selective quotes surfaced to feed the narrative machine. That silence suggested discipline, and discipline suggested confidence. Institutions rarely stay quiet unless they believe the process can speak for itself later. Within the fictional industry surrounding D4vd, the effects were subtle but undeniable. Conversations became cautious. Opportunities paused in mid-motion. Not canceled, just delayed. This was not judgment. It was risk management. In environments driven by reputation, uncertainty enough to slow everything down, the grand jury's internal question narrowed to a single point. Does this story stand on its own? Not morally, not emotionally, structurally. Could it be understood by people with no context, no loyalty, no history? Could it survive scrutiny without explanation? That question matters more than any accusation ever could. As deliberations approached their conclusion, the room grew quieter still. Fewer witnesses were called. Fewer questions were asked. When institutions stop asking questions, it doesn't mean they've lost interest. It means they believe they've heard enough. For D4vd, the fictional tension lay in the waiting, not knowing which version of the story, if any, would emerge, not knowing whether silence would remain protection or become vacuum. This kind of waiting is uniquely heavy because it removes control, and control, once lost, rarely returns in full. The narrative at this point was no longer about wrongdoing or innocence. It was about exposure, about whether the sealed record would remain sealed or whether it would transition into something public, formal, and irreversible. That decision is not taken lightly. It reshapes lives even when it resolves nothing conclusively. In this imagined world, the final sessions ended without announcement. No signal was sent. No calendar changed. The doors simply closed one last time. And that, paradoxically, was the loudest moment of all. Because when a grand jury concludes its work, the silence that follows is different from the silence that came before. It is no longer gathering. It is deciding, and decisions, even unspoken ones, move reality forward. D4vd's name, in the closing notes of this fictional process, was written carefully, not underlined, not circled, simply placed where it belonged within the structure that had been built. Whatever came next would not be driven by noise, outrage, or speculation. It would be driven by process. If you've made it this far, understand one thing clearly. Stories like this don't live on the surface. They live in the details, the pauses, the silence between headlines, and that's exactly where Rapscope X operates. We don't chase noise. We decode it. We don't repeat rumors. We break down narratives, timelines, and pressure points that others overlook. This story was not built for shock value. It was built to make you think, to question how power, influence, silence, and systems collide when the spotlight turns off. And if that kind of deep storytelling pulls you in, then you're already in the right place. On Rapscope X, we go beyond the obvious. We connect dots across culture, music, industry power, and unseen processes. We take stories people scroll past and open them up layer by layer, not to tell you what to think, but to give you the full picture so you decide what matters. If you believe hip-hop culture is more than music, if you know the industry moves differently behind closed doors, if you understand that silence can be louder than statements, then don't just watch, be part of the movement. Subscribe to Rapscope X so you never miss stories that others are afraid to touch. Like this video if you value depth over drama. It tells the algorithm this content matters. Comment your perspective below, not reactions, real thoughts. Because the strongest conversations happen when different minds collide. Share this story with someone who understands that real narratives unfold slowly, not in viral clips. Rapscope X in here for quick clicks. We're here to build a community that values intelligence, patience, and perspective. A place where stories aren't rushed and conclusions aren't forced. Future episodes will go deeper, wider, sharper, more uncomfortable. And once you're subscribed, you won't just be watching from the outside, you'll be ahead of the conversation while everyone else is catching up. This channel is for people who read between the lines. For those who know the industry in black and white. For those who understand that the real story often begins after the silence. Welcome to Rapscope X. Stay curious, stay critical, and stay locked in, because this story, and many others like it, are far from over. Many others like it are far from over.